I want you to imagine that your shiny new digital camera didn't have an exposure meter inside, or it didn't work, or the battery that powered it died. Of course, with a digital camera, that would mean the whole camera wouldn't work. Well, maybe what if the histogram just stopped being displayed? Okay, yeah, I know you would return it under warranty, but I think you can get what I'm hinting at. Well, what if that happened? If the internal meter did die? What would that mean? Would you still be able to take pictures? Would you still be able to take perfectly exposed pictures? Could you guess the exposure for a chosen scene instead? Or is your camera now basically a brick? Well, back in the days of film, when not all cameras had meters, or they didn't have sophisticated and reliable meters, we would use the Sunny 16 rule. That taught you the basics about exposure in photography. And if you're not sure what this is, well, I did an e-guide about it for my E6 subscription actually. And of course, this is just one reason to subscribe to E6. There's over 200 of these e-guides in the subscription. So that's actually 200 reasons to subscribe. The other is that it supports this channel. Without that, this channel, this video would just be me doing this. Subscribe to E6 and stop me having to do that. Anyway, the Sunny 16 rule was a useful backup to help achieve the correct exposure. It's a simple principle and approach, and it still works. And it is a method I still use with my film cameras, as some of them don't have meters in them, or the meter has stopped working. But to make my film cameras feel more modern, so the cameras don't just become bricks, I reached out to a company called KEKS, who, no, in fact, don't make trousers to sell in Northern England, as you'd think, but instead make external exposure meters for film cameras. Now, there are many examples of these type of meters available on the market now, as film and film cameras are becoming popular again. But most of these meters are analog style, with twin dials for adjusting aperture and shutter speed. These ones, although will work fine, don't really appeal to me as being functional, or I just don't care for the way they work. KEKS, however, have gone a different route, instead use a digital OLED display. Their KMQ model is basically the same size as a sugar cube, and it sits in the camera's hot shoe. It features constant metering just like a digital camera meter, and displays this as a readout of aperture and shutter speed readings based on the ISO, or film speed you set in the menu. Now, they also do a more sophisticated version, the KMO2, that works in either continuous metering mode or as a fixed single reading with a press of a button. I chose the silver ones from them as that matches my camera's top plates, but they do these in black too, and you can choose a KMQ model with the back display or top display depending on the camera you are using. Now, of course, a product sent to me for review wouldn't be reviewed properly by me if I didn't find any faults with them, as nothing is perfect, is it? Not for someone as fussy as me anyway. And these do, unfortunately, have some minor faults. So the fault on the KMQ is the display. It is rather small. I need glasses for close-up vision, and without those, this display is a bit small to see at times. I'm sure they could have used the whole size of the unit to accommodate a slightly larger digital display. Not all film users who might use this are young, trendy whippersnappers with perfect eyesight, you know. The KMO2 model display is larger, but the actual digits are not. So same fault here. But as well as that, you can see on this model, it has 4 buttons to change the various settings it offers. And you can change quite a lot actually, including half stop or 1/3 stop settings. You can adjust to make it bias under or over exposure. You can have an EV readout if you want. You can set it to match the setting limits of your camera. And you can set this to work in either shutter or aperture priority, just like the Q model there. And as you can see, this larger model has 4 buttons for adjusting all those settings. What? Which button does what, you ask? No idea, can't remember. It says in the instruction book But without that, you're just left guessing. Or you need a good memory. So why not just mark each button? At least show the one for the mode and perhaps the up and down adjustments. A couple of arrows etched on wouldn't have gone amiss here. But that aside, all these type of meters need to be accurate. And in my testings, I found both of these are. Well, I say both. And by that, I mean one of them. The KM02 matches, in most cases, both my meter in my Nikon FM2 and my handheld Sagonic meter. The Q model, unfortunately, always seems to underexpose. I was expecting them to match each other, but no, sadly not. You can adjust this model to compensate, but I only found that out by reporting this back to KEKS. It's not in the instructions as, well, there are none for this model, and therefore they don't tell you this by default. The Q model has a convenient auto off feature to save the battery. The more expensive KM02 doesn't, however. Well, it does in single reading mode, but in continuous, no. You have to turn it off manually, which is a shame, and with a different off button. Oh yeah, it has an on button and a separate off button. However, faults aside, these mean I don't have to carry a separate exposure meter with me when out, and I can give my brain a rest and forget the sunny 16 rule. They both have built-in batteries and charge via USB-C, so that's good. Now, of course, these little things may be totally irrelevant to you if you don't shoot film. Your digital camera has a great meter built in, and that's all you need. Your digital camera, though, that takes reflected light readings, just like these little meters do. They measure the light bouncing off a subject. And just like the sunny 16 rule that you may or may not know, understanding how reflected light readings are influenced is maybe something you don't even think about, but should you? So for instance, what if I pointed these meters, mounted on my film camera, at a bright scene or a light coloured subject, like snow for instance? What reading would I expect to get? What if you point your digital camera, which basically has just one of these meters built in, at a very dark tone subject or an area of shadow? What if the subject wasn't a mid-tone or didn't reflect 18% light? What then? And why are reflected light meters perhaps not as accurate as a handheld incident light meter? Well, if you don't know the answers to those questions, does it really matter? Does it matter to your photography? Are the meters in our digital cameras sophisticated enough to make this irrelevant? Is it just film photography then, where these things do become important, more relevant, and in a way just increase your awareness and understanding of exposure? Is the art of calculating exposure therefore being lost in the digital age? These meters then will make my film photography a bit easier to do. They aim to make calculating exposure maybe not as easy and advanced as using a digital camera, but perhaps one step closer, and perhaps easier for anyone contemplating giving film a go with an old film camera. And maybe that's their intended market. For those that don't know about the sunny 16 rule, perhaps the younger generation who are experimenting with film, youngsters who have good eyesight of course. Using film and trying out these meters has made me aware of exposure a lot more again. I feel I had a good understanding of exposure from my original film days, but now that's being tested again. In digital, I guess I largely forgot about the knowledge that I did have. With a camera showing exposure adjustment on screen, with a live histogram representation of that, we can easily adjust exposure without necessarily knowing why the image is looking a bit dark. Just adjust it until it looks right. And with digital, that can be done in post even if the result is a stop or two underexposed. With my favourite film, Fuji Velvia back in the day, that just wasn't an option. In a way, I think this is a shame. It's much like our digital cameras taking control and starting to compose the shot for us. At the moment, that isn't a feature, and we may not want that, but the art of exposure is perhaps being lost. These hot shoe meters then are great for anyone who shoots film or wants to start shooting film, or anyone who is on the lookout for a camera that may not have a meter built in, such as a Leica M2. If you are in the market for an external meter, then I can recommend either of these. They do work well, as long as you don't have bad close-up eyesight. For anyone else, well, maybe we need to have more of a discussion about exposure. I'll see you next time.